Good. All right. Well, thank you for joining us here on another episode on Viewpoints. And we are still in our sermon series talking about mental health, but today we have a very exciting episode. We have Pastor Sean with us today. Thank you for being with us. And we also have Candace Mahaffey. And Candace, you've actually been on the show before. Yes. And so for the listener, why don't you just tell us what you do and kind of the line of work that you're in?
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me back. It's an honor to be here again. And first, I just want to say I'm so thrilled that Crestview is doing another series on mental health. I just really applaud y'all and commend you for doing that. But I am a licensed professional counselor here in the state of Texas. I've been in practice for over 10 years now. And I have a small private practice here in Midland currently. I enjoy working with a range of topics. I really have a special focus with working with clients who have autoimmune diseases, chronic illnesses. I work with a lot of postpartum depression mothers, and obviously just kind of the generalized anxiety, depression type things as well. I've worked in a multitude of settings. I've worked psychiatric inpatient. I've worked group practice, group therapy. I've also worked at nonprofit community centers, and now in my private practice. I'm a wife. We've been married for 10 years now. Mother of two, got an 8-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter. And most importantly, I'm also a child of Christ.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, again, we just can't thank you enough. And I know today's episode is going to be impactful. But let's just kind of dive right into the first question that we have for you. In your practice, how have you seen medical treatment and spiritual treatment work together hand in hand?
Well, I love when I get to see that. That's not always the case. I think we really, as a society, like to separate mental health from medical. We like to separate it from spiritual. And I really, truly, personally believe the more we can encompass a whole person treatment, the better off we are. Right. And I say that both not as a medical professional, but seeing that medically, but as a mental health professional, when we can encompass a whole person treatment. We're designed both with physical, social, emotional, mental, and spiritual needs. And I don't really see the purpose in separating those. Right. I feel like when we can treat a whole person and encompass all of those, the outcome is much better. So just to kind of answer that, I think it works best when we can treat both versus separating. I know in my own practice, part of providing treatment includes developing a treatment plan, meaning why is someone coming in? How are we helping? What's the plan moving forward? I know that may be a surprise to some that we don't just sit down and talk. And there actually is some clinical stuff happening in the background there. But one of those things of a treatment plan includes developing, identifying healthy coping skills or developing them, and identifying needed resources. I think it's a shame if we don't use that whole person approach and we don't include someone's spirituality in that. So I think it's really important to do that so I can figure out if they have a faith, what does that look like? What do they believe? And how can we utilize that in some of those mental health aspects?
Yeah, absolutely. How would you say your personal faith has influenced the way you teach and help these people in your practice? How would you say that works with your own personal faith? Sure.
First off, I'd like to say it's been really just kind of a beautiful evolution, reflecting back. When I was a newbie, when I was fresh out of grad school, the first setting I worked in was at a psychiatric hospital. It was a very structured environment, meaning treatment was also very structured. So in the early work, I was very careful to not be unethical or spiritually influential. That was not my job. Right. That was made very clear in that setting. So I also can see that it was a lack of my own spiritual maturity and professional inexperience, but I really would avoid spiritual talks in counseling. I just felt like, oh no, let's not go there. And if a client or a patient would bring it up, I would kind of address it just to explore, like, okay, well, you brought it up, we'll talk about it. But it just felt like really unsafe territory for me. Right. Fast forward, decade later of experience and my own personal growth. Now I dive into that. I want to know what a person's faith is, and I want to incorporate it into work. That's good. And I really feel like I have the freedom to do so in private practice. I get to, I follow my ethical guidelines, of course, but I get to do that, and I get to really utilize that. I feel like I can have those hard conversations with clients now about their faith while being ethical, especially if I align with another believer, we can really dive in. Or if I'm working with someone with a different religion, I can have those conversations.
Right.
I can even have those conversations with someone who believes, that has a stance of agnostic or atheist, where there's room to work there too. The Holy Spirit is still at work, even in that setting.
Yeah.
And now in my private practice, I pray over my clients. I pray independently.
That's awesome.
Before each workday. I pray that the Holy Spirit just moves in me, that it's less me and more Him speaking.
That's awesome.
Because, as again, kind of reflecting back, as a new professional, I would think I had to walk into each session with a plan and how are we going to address this and what am I going to do? I thought I had to have it all lined out. And I still have lots of room for growth. I'm far from being done. But now I kind of take the stance of I don't have to have it all figured out.
Sure.
And it's actually much more beautiful and effective when I don't have that attitude, that I just let God work through me. And I do have my clinical background. I have my professional experience. But there have been times where I've sat with someone and I'm listening to them talk about their struggles. And I see Satan's footholds, and I see where he is taken a small crevice and he's just kind of hanging out in there, and just calling that out and, praying or encouraging them to pray and use that resource to just pray the Holy Spirit over them when they're in those moments.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on a lot of that stuff of just basically saying that it's not on your own strength, that you have to have it all figured out or tell these patients, hey, this is what you have to do. But I know in the line of work that me and Sean are in as well, sometimes on the flip side of that, it was kind of crazy to me to go, we have to feel like we have it all figured out on scriptural based.
Sure.
But I remember the first time I was thinking of and hearing self-care and rest. And I was like, oh my goodness, these are powerful tools that you can use on the opposite of kind of where me and you are. But that is amazing. And I'm just so glad to hear that you're praying for these patients and you're helping them through their faith. It's amazing. I kind of want to touch on some other things and kind of dive a little bit deeper. As Christians, I think we tend to use, all these Christian words. And like you said, we try to have everything figured out. But what would you say to the people that go, just have more faith? It's, you got to kind of work through it, that type of mindset. Have you seen that a lot in your practice with people trying to help other people?
Not necessarily in my practice, but I see it. I mean, I attend church and I've seen it. I hear those words. I think it I just want to circle back to taking that kind of segregated approach to treating a person. I think that if we're not looking at somebody as a whole, that their emotional or mental needs might need professional attending to. Right. I feel like I just want to ask this question. Would we say that to somebody with a medical condition?
Yeah.
That's
a good point.
Yeah. I mean, we look at them and we say, no, take your medications, follow a healthy diet and lifestyle, follow your medical guidelines for a good recovery. And I wonder why we take that approach with mental health. I mean, there's a lot of stigma. I understand the why, but I want to ask better, why are we not encouraging each other to utilize resources? I feel like God gifts us these resources, whether it's a counselor, a psychiatrist, a support group, no different than He might gift us a doctor or a physician that brings us the healing for a medical condition.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so that's just kind of my own personal standpoint on that of let's just look at it not so different, but just another part of being human and see where God supplies us with what we need in different forms.
It's good.
Yeah.
Sean, what about you? I know that, again, we've been in a lot of counseling sessions with whether it be students or adults. What would you say to that mindset?
I think it's really interesting how the author of one of the Gospels in the book of Acts was a physician. He was a doctor. It was Luke.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, I think it's always been silly to separate the medical field from spirituality and from faith practices because it's just not in the Bible to have that. Whenever people talk about experiencing healing as this consequence of having more faith, this is the result. If you have enough faith, you're going to be healthy, you're going to be healed. Whether that's for a physical condition, like an illness, a virus or something going on, or something that's a mental health issue, I think you're really presenting a false gospel.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the church world, the church language we would use is the prosperity gospel, right? If you have enough faith, you're going to be happy, healthy, and wealthy. But that's not what the Bible presents. That's not who Jesus is. Yeah. And so I think, particularly in mental health, the stigma and that separation that's there is just so non-biblically founded. I think it's just tradition and like the stigma that Candace, that you were talking about, that we have around mental health. But I think it's on both sides. I think there's the Christians who think this has got to be a God fix, and then there's the secular side of it, that maybe the non-Christian side that would say, no, faith doesn't have anything to do with this. It's all the chemical imbalance. It's all like circumstances in someone's life. But there really is a combination of things. And Candace, something that you had mentioned is like taking that combined approach. Like you can deal with maybe some of the lies, deal with some of the spirituality, deal with like pointing out some of Satan's footholds, while also appropriately treating symptoms and those chemical imbalances. Like it's not one or the other. You can have both going on. In James chapter 1, verse 17, it says that every good and perfect gift comes down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. And I love that verse because it's saying everything that is good comes from God. And so if we can identify that something is good, we need to then attribute that to God. And so for me, I go towards healing. All healing is good, whether by medicine or by miracle. If it's healing, it's from God. And so I don't think that it would be biblical in any way to say that you can't take medicine to address a mental health issue, or you can't see a secular counselor to address a mental health issue. I think if it's going to treat something and bring you to a healthier place, then that is God working his goodness.
That's good. And Candace, I just want to throw it back to you. And Sean, thank you so much for touching on that. For the listener, we have quite a few people that listen. And I know last time we talked about this, when we spoke with you, that was shared a lot. And I think that helped a ton of people. So to the listener today that's listening, maybe in his car, what would be one thing that you would tell them on this subject to kind of just help them stick with it throughout the week? Something that you want to share with them to kind of end this podcast?
It's funny. As I was driving over here, the song "Fear is a Liar" came on, and I thought, that is such a great stance because we talk about fear a lot in counseling, and we can identify fear in a mental health way, talking about how it is what we call a cognitive distortion sometimes. Fear, obviously, there are realistic fears, things we should be afraid of for our own safety measures. But often that's not what people come into counseling for. It's the psychological fears. And that's where that song fits in. Fear is a liar, and how often I deal with that in sessions of just really breaking that down. And I can take my psychology, I can use cognitive behavioral therapy to take that fear that is a lie from Satan, break it into a psychological stance that I use in counseling, and plug God right in there with it. And it's just this beautiful stance. So to encourage somebody that's going through this, anything, we're all going through things, whether it's a season or a constant, don't forget your truths. God is truth. God is there. If you feel called to seek out professional help, to seek out help within your church community, I don't know that any of it's wrong if it doesn't take you away from God. If it brings you back, kind of like Sean said, a healing is good, and good things are from God.
That's awesome.
It's great.
Candace, thank you so much. Pastor John actually talked about that not too long ago, about don't believe everything you think. And I think that fits hand in hand with what you just said of don't forget the truths. And so, but Sean, any final thoughts on this sermon series you just preached this Sunday morning, which was great? And so anything that you would like to leave the listener with today?
I think it would just be that final reminder that the power of God is so much bigger than what you're going through. But at the exact same time, God is not so big that he's distant from you, that he's near, that he is inviting us closer to him, and that whenever we bring our situations to him, it's a promise in the Bible that his peace will guard us. And so in this series, The Battle in Your Mind, the victory that we can have is God's peace guarding our hearts and minds. It's not necessarily a change of our circumstances, but it's our hearts and our minds guarded by God's peace.
That's awesome. Candace, thank you so much again for being with us
Thanks
today.
for having me back.
Sean, thank you. To the listener, we hope this helps you, and remember your truths. God bless.